Good evening, everyone. This panel is conducted by Internet Society of Sri Lanka, and Internet Society is the society of users of Internet, as well as Internet Society has so many other functions. One is the IETF is part of the Internet Engineering Task Force, is part of the Internet Society. So Internet Society helped Sri Lanka at the very beginning, at the time of internet was to popularize internet in Sri Lanka. And so some of our academia, some of our members of academia were trained by Internet Society. Subsequently, Internet Society Sri Lanka chapter was inaugurated in the latter part of 2010. The latter part of 2000, in fact, in 2012, and since then it has grown. Right now, it has grown for there. We have about 700 members. Now, today we are going to talk about the localization, and especially in Sri Lanka, as well as some of the initiatives that have taken place in the localization, recent localization, especially in internationalized domain names. So let me introduce the panelists. Dr. Ruvan Weerasinghe, Senior Lecturer, University of Colombo School of Computing, and also the Head of Local Language Research, Local Language Technology Research Lab of the UCSC. And the Prof. Sarmad Hussain, he's joining from Pakistan. And he's actually the Senior Director, IDNs, UA Programs, Internet Corporation, of ICANN, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Then we have Champika, Ms. Champika Wijetunga, Technical Engagement Manager for the Asia Pacific region at ICANN. And we have Chamila Liyanage, a researcher from University of Colombo School of Computing, and Dr. Surangika Ranatunga, Senior Lecturer, National Language Processing Center, Department of Computing, University of Moratuwa. So let us start, and I would like to talk about a little bit, because since that we have some of the pioneers here from the localization. So I would like to start with Dr. Ruvan Weerasinghe. So some of the Sri Lankan localization started from University of Colombo. So can you also, Dr. Ruvan Weerasinghe, can we go into the early 80s and 90s where localization started in Colombo, and give a little bit of what happened in those days at the University of Colombo, and the University of Colombo's contribution to the localization.
It's good to get into a forum like this after some time. A lot of the work before, when most of us got involved in technology, IT, in English, ASCII, which was the American standard. And so right back in 1990, there was a move in Indic languages, standardizing of Indic languages, and Sri Lanka also was part of that, but we kind of tagged along. And at the outset, I want to just say, because in the 5 minutes, I'm just going to talk about 5 things. And each of these 5 things, I've been privileged to work in partnership and collaboration with some people, and some of them are on this panel. So in 1990, when this initiative to standardize Sinhala started in Sri Lanka, there was a thing called /key, Sri Lanka, obviously it was Sri Lankan ASCII. It only looked at Sinhala though at that time. Because the Indic effort took care of all the Indic languages, including Tamil. And of course, a person who pioneered in this area was Dr. Nandasara. And of course, behind most of these collaborated was, of course, who had a finger in all kinds of pies, and so he alerted us to various things that were happening globally. So from 1990, then we jumped to 1998, when again, because Professor Samnak have heard about the international fora, such as the Unicode Consortium, were trying to standardize Sinhala. And so
Dr. Ruvan, can I interrupt you if you don't mind? There is some, there is interruption. There is a fan, I think,
okay, sorry,
interrupting the mic.
Sorry, you guys forced me to wear my suit, and that's what happened.
Okay.
Okay, right. Is it better now?
It's better. It's very, very much better. Yes.
Okay. So as I said, from 1990, then we jump 8 years to 1998, and because we realized, Professor Samarnaika realized that there was some people who were kind of non-native speakers were trying to standardize Sinhala on Unicode, and so he sent this team of Dr. Nanzara and Professor J.B. Disanak, and they went and made some representations and kind of managed to avoid some of the decisions in that early draft from 1997. And this was based on a Sri Lankan standardization effort called the SLS 1134. And then we jump another 10 years when the other way around, Unicode already had Tamil in it. And so in 2008, SLS, Sri Lankan standard, adopted, made some minor changes, but largely adopted the Unicode Tamil, so that we have SLS 1326. So, so it was after that that we can say that, you know, computers were technology was localized. However, another important milestone was, of course, in 2010 when Professor Gian Dias was at the ICTA, and he was looking at internet in Sri Lanka, and then he realized, okay, you know, without Sinhala and Tamil, there is no real internet for Sri Lanka. So he had a major push during that time, and so in 2010 is when we can really claim that we have Sinhala kind of more or less out of the box when it comes to technology, because of course, as we know, though the Linux world was already kind of localized, we were in some sense dependent on Windows, because a very large percentage of users use Windows. So it's only with Windows 10 that we have something out of the box for both Sinhala and Tamil. Tamil came a bit before that. So these are the four main milestones I see. And then my personal input, of course, has been that in the East Sri Lanka project, since I was one of the part of the negotiating team, seeing what great plans we had for industry development, telecenter rollout, and infrastructure, and so on, I realized two big blank spots. One was local language support, Sinhala and Tamil, and one was open source, kind of anything about open source. And so in those two initiatives, I have to mention, of course, Mr. Vasantha Desapriya, who kind of took that from that point onwards, and we had some really great efforts by him after that for Sinhala and Tamil on the ground. The second personal input is, of course, a lot of this was made possible because we were able to set up a research lab at UCSC in 2003. And that's where the other resource person who's here comes into collaboration with me, Professor Sarmad Hussain. And so, and I think we should mention IDRC was doing a lot of localization support in the region. And so we were able to have a lab And one of our aims at the initial stage was that by 2007, nobody will talk about Unicode because they will just talk about Sinhala and Tamil on the computer. It didn't quite happen then. It took another 3 years, but in 2010, we kind of got there. And of course, the LTRL, as we call it, I'm no longer, by the way, the head of that, though Hussain introduced me like that, but I'm still part of it. And LTRL, from the word go, said we need both resources as well as the technologies, the tools to go with it. And so today, I think Chamila will talk a little bit about what we've done since then. But I think my 5 minutes is up. I hope you got a bit of a kind of a historical perspective on how things rolled out in terms of local language support for Sinhala and Tamil in Sri Lanka.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ruvan. In fact, the next panelist, and I have earlier introduced from the ICANN, but I know him from the Pan Localization project. And for me, actually, it was very interesting because I think I was one of the first to be trained from Sri Lanka at the Pan Localization project in the basic infrastructure. So let me, but today he is involved with us with the internationalized domain names development in Sri Lanka, and as well as in the region as a director, as I said before. So let me ask Professor Sarmad, I think, about a little bit about pan localization, if you can actually touch upon. But I would like you to concentrate on the internationalized domain names, what we are doing right now. So can you please share with us what is your experience also a little bit about the pan localization?
Thank you, Harsha, and thank you, Ruvan. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarmad Hussain. I am with Internet Corporation. So let me start with the IDNs, and then I'll circle back to the pan localization project. Basically, one of the key issues which we faced, I guess, early during the internet times was that it was easily possible to have local language content on websites. However, it was for many of the in the region, many of the newspapers, many of the other organizations which were producing local language content, for example, in Sinhala and Tamil in Sri Lanka, the challenge was that the addressing system, the domain name which was used, was still in ASCII. And that remained a challenge from an accessibility point of view. And therefore, community very early on realized that the addressing system for the internet, or the domain name system, also needs to be localized and made available in local languages. So you should be able to have for a university or a newspaper, you can have a local language address in Sinhala script or Tamil script, for example. And so having a domain name not in Latin but in local language is normally referred to as an internationalized domain name. And basically what that means is you need to localize the internet's addressing system. As you know, internet's addressing system actually, you normally have a domain name, and domain name is separated by different or is composed of different labels. So you can actually have if you have example.lk, you have example, which is the second level domain name, and then .lk, which is the top level domain name. And both these labels have slightly different rules on how they can be formed. So for example, the second level domains can have digits. So I can have example123.lk, but you can't have digits, for example, for top level domains. It can only be characters. So as I said, initially we started with ASCII domain names. So you could only have letters A through Z. You could add digits 0 through 9 and a hyphen. to develop what is normally called a domain name label. However, when we started internationalizing this, and the community basically based the internationalized standard on the Unicode standard itself. And suddenly going from an ASCII, which has 128 characters, and within the domain names, as I said, only 63 of those characters are allowed, the letters, the digits, and hyphen. Suddenly from that space, we, when we go to IDNs, we go to about the current Unicode standard has 150,000 characters. And not only that, we started with just Latin script, the ASCII characters, but the current Unicode standard has 150 scripts. So suddenly the space which we need to define to allow for internationalized domain names, there was a significant expansion in what was possible. That expansion brought opportunity, but also brought challenges. Opportunity because now suddenly everybody around the globe would be able to have domain names in their own names, in their own, script and language. And that's actually excellent from an accessibility point of view. However, on the other side, we already know that even within ASCII domain names, there is opportunity for people to do phishing. So there are security challenges. Just imagine increasing the character space from just 63 characters to, a subset of 150,000 characters. The security issues obviously become significantly large. And therefore, the challenge for the community was, how do we manage this expansion in domain name space in a way that it balances both the linguistic expression, which allows accessibility to everybody, but on the other hand, also manage it in a way, this expansion in a way that internet domain namespace still remains very secure for people who are using it. So there's this challenge and the solution for top level domains. So for second level domains and the registries normally work to develop their own systems or rules, but for top level domains, for example, if you want to have Sri Lanka in a local language in Sinhala or Tamil, which you already do as an IDN CCTLD, country code top level domain, one would, or a more generic top level domain. So if a business wants to have a string in Sinhala to develop business, they, what would be, a question would be, what is the right or what is a good string for a top level domain? Are there any strings which are too similar to each other that they can potentially cause security problems? So those are some of the questions which we had to answer. And the way, community at ICANN decided to find the solution to this problem was that they said that this is not something ICANN has expertise in. We need to go and talk to the communities which use the script and ask the communities to tell us what are the rules to determine what are valid and valid top level domain names in particular scripts. For that purpose, we actually launched a large project where we are actually working on 28 different scripts which are actively used in across the world. And Sinhala and Tamil both are scripts which are listed or part of that engagement or that project. So for that purposes, we actually came to Sri Lanka. We worked with the local community. We are very thankful to Harsha, who led or chaired that panel, and many of the members in Sri Lanka who helped us develop those rules. That was a challenging process, but the team or the panel, voluntary panel in Sri Lanka helped lead the way. In about 2 years ago, they developed and formalized the rules and handed them to Internet Corporation. And we are now using those rules to potentially develop checks on what are good versus bad labels for top level for Sinhala language, for example. The panel also provided feedback to the work which was being done on Tamil. Tamil was obviously a panel which included basically experts from multiple countries because Tamil is used across multiple countries. And we've now been able to conclude that work as well. We are now using that input to now also develop reference rules for labels at the second level as well. So it has been a significant effort by the community from Sri Lanka, which has provided us the rules, which we are now implementing and enabling top-level domain names in Sinhala, in Tamil, and also in many other languages. And we're working with communities across the globe, script communities across the globe for that purpose, for determining these rules. Interestingly, this work started back during the pan-localization project, if you recall. So at that time, the IDNA 2008 standard, which actually is the base standard, which allows for IDNs and developed by Internet Engineering Task Force, that was being developed. The earlier version, IDNA 2003, was not, didn't meet all the requirements. So IETF was updating. And at that time, we'd worked together through the pan-localization project, and there was a input from the pan-localization team from UCSC on what are the characters which should be used in domain names from Sinhala, which should not be used in domain names in Sinhala, and and we'd actually taken that input to IETF to actually develop to contribute to the actual base standard IDNA 2008 for IDNs at that time. So as Ruvan and Harsha suggested, obviously our association with my personal association with many of the colleagues in Sri Lanka goes back a long way. I've been visiting Sri Lanka and UCSC for the last 20 years. Starting with I still remember very fondly remember my very first meeting with Professor Samran who was still at UCSC at that time, who introduced me to Ruvan and Harsha at that time. So we've, it's been great working with the local community, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration with the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Sarmad. In fact, some of the work that we had done, I think, basically enabled so many people in Sri Lanka. I think today when we talk about Facebook, you will see the Sinhala without any issue, right? Except for a few features. Sinhala is now working fairly well. So let me, I want to actually have the next panelist, I think a Sri Lankan, but living in Australia, but part of the, definitely that he comes back and forth and always comes and helps us when there is especially the networking side. Now today I'm going to ask entirely different, because he worked with us in the generation panel, I think for months, and we had a lot of discussions online, Mr. Champika Wijetunga. And so I would like, he's part of the ICANN, but I would like him to talk about and to explain, and the universal acceptance and the email address internationalized domain names from Sri Lankan perspective. So I think if you can sort of give us a little bit about universal acceptance, because I think it's the next thing we have to work on, I guess, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Harsha. And also actually, thanks for inviting me for this panel as well. And so just to sort of, talk about the point that you just clarified. Now, first of all, earlier, Sarmad and also yourself, you gave a sort of introduction about the whole background of IDNs, or the internationalized domain names. Now, if you really think about the whole objective of this session is that in the internet, we have to make sure that language should not be a barrier when we try to use internet applications and so on. So that's where we are coming from. So if we are to use our local languages like Sinhala and Tamil, then we have to make sure that the various applications what we use can accept both scripts. Now, say, now turning on to sort of, domain name system or DNS, now pretty much everything we do in the internet, we use DNS. Say, for example, if you want to browse the internet, or if you have to send an email, or if you have to use a mobile app and so on, you still have to use DNS, and DNS work behind the scenes. Now, historically, from the protocol design itself, DNS work, based on ASCII. Earlier, Dr. Ruvan also sort of, mentioned about the ASCII and so on. That was established very long time ago. But the thing is that when the DNS protocol was designed back in the early 1980s or so, it was all based on ASCII. So when you send a DNS request, it resolved based on the ASCII script. So the thing is that if we are to use, say, Sinhala or Tamil domain name or an email ID, then this whole ASCII, basically the whole the local language script has to be converted to an ASCII script. So that's how the DNS resolution can happen with a, say, either a Sinhala script or a Tamil script. Now, the other very important thing is that the concept or the whole idea of universal acceptance, or simply we call UA. Now, the idea of UA is that, so if we are to use any internet application, we have to make sure those applications would accept, say, the Sinhala domain names or Tamil domain names, or Sinhala email IDs or Tamil email IDs. And I can, give a very quick example. I have a Sinhala email ID. So today, when I try to register for this session, because, when you try to fill the registration form, it asks for your email ID. So I gave first, just to test it out, I gave my Sinhala email ID, but then it threw an error, right? So basically it said, no, this is an invalid email ID. And so it was asking me for a English email ID to register. So that itself says that, the application doesn't really accept the Sinhala email IDs. So just like that, there are so many of other applications. It could be the browsers, it could be, various other applications and so on, may not accept the Sinhala domains or Tamil domains or Sinhala email IDs and Tamil email IDs and so on. So that's what we are talking about. So basically, if you're using any application, we have to make sure that the application can accept those IDN domains and the local language based email IDs. And then it should also be able to validate that. And also it should be able to process. And in case if you're storing those email IDs in a database or things like that, it should be able to store that. And then also if you're displaying that properly, either in a certain application or in a browser and so on, it should be displayed properly. So all these things should happen. So this is what we call universal acceptance. So even from Sri Lankan perspective, obviously here we are talking about Sinhala and Tamil names, we should be able to do all that. So in the world, there has been a lot of work has been going on, just like what Sarmad was explaining, with a lot of other scripts. For example, like in India, there are quite a lot of scripts are being used. And similarly, like in China, Chinese script is used quite widely. So they have a lot of email IDs in Chinese, a lot of domain names in Chinese, and so on. So, say, for example, that if the other very important thing is something called email address internationalization, which means having an email ID in local language script. Say, now for that, especially, a lot of parties has to work on this. Obviously, the application side, the developers and so on, that is one aspect. But at the same time, we have to also make sure that the mail server operators, the network operators, they should also provide the support to accept the local language-based email IDs. Say, the EAI-based email, which means email address internationalization. We call those as EAI emails. And Now, say for example, if you are nowadays, we are during the whole of this conference, we've been talking about lots of aspect of digitalization, basically, opening up, your e-commerce to, other countries and so on. So say, for example, if you are to receive an email from, say, someone from another country who has got a different sort of, email ID with a different language, say a Chinese email ID, for example. The thing is that the mail servers, obviously from that sender's mail server, until it gets to the receiver's mail server, it has to pass through a number of mail servers. And these mail servers also has to make sure that it accepts these email without basically throwing out any errors, because if there are some errors, if the email servers cannot process that, cannot handle that, then the email will be dropped so that the email will not be delivered to the recipient. So this is also why it is very important that in case if there are some email server operators who are operating mail servers, you have to make sure that you should allow the EAI support or the email address internationalization support, so that you can accept, your mail servers can accept the email IDs in different language scripts. This is also quite important. So if there are any mail server operators here, just try to tune into this whole discussion, as well as try to. There are quite a lot of documentation available. There is in fact a steering group called Universal Acceptance Steering Group. We also have a website for that called uasg.tech. It's uasg.tech. So there are plenty of reading materials, white papers, and things like that. So I would quite recommend you to even visit that in case if someone is more interested in this whole topic. And I think at this stage, due to the time limitation, I will stop here. But if you have any further questions, feel free to contact me anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Champika. So let me invite the next panelist, Dr. Suranka Ranatunga. And one of the things is that I think it was a great collaboration between we had in the University of Colombo and the Moratuwa long time back, as Dr. Ruvan pointed out earlier. So anyway, can you talk about the current status of your local language computing research at University of Moratuwa? Because I think it's very important that because there are a lot of researches going on right now at the University of Moratuwa.
Yes, so at National Languages Processing Center, we are working on multiple fronts. So the main focus is to develop end-user applications that support Sinhala, that process Sinhala text. So our flagship project currently is machine translation for Sinhala, Tamil, and English. So in all 6 directions. So this is being funded by a large World Bank grant. So we are having very good progress, and we are mainly focusing on the official government documents, because for other day-to-day translations, Google Translate is more or less giving acceptable results, but not for the official government documents. So we are working on this, I think, since 2016, and we have made very good progress. And on top of that, some other projects that we are working on is sentiment analysis. We have already released a preliminary version of our sentiment analyzer for Sinhala. And now we are expanding on that line, and we are working on hate speech detection and then sarcasm detection for Sinhala, and code mix data, and to a little extent to Tamil. So especially code mix data processing is very important these days, because in social media like Twitter or Facebook, and even in different news articles, when people put comments there, it is not pure Sinhala script, right? So it is Sinhala script, English script, Sinhala written in English script, English written in Sinhala script. So it's a huge mix. So we should be able to process this code mix text to learn what the opinions of different people. And on top of that, there are small projects going on to identify to measure the similarity between Sinhala documents or to identify plagiarized documents and to identify paraphrase sentences. So in small scale, those projects are also going on. And in another front, we are working on developing language processing tools. That means, part of speech taggers, morphological analyzers, grammar parsers, named entity recognizers, and co-reference resolution techniques. So these are, end users will not need them, but to develop the end use applications such as sentiment analyzers or machine translators, to develop very good systems, we need to have these language processing tools, or I would call them linguistic tools. And the development is very challenging. It may seem very simple, but for example, if you take part of speech tagging, that means you have to, you need the machine to give a category to each and every Sinhala word. So one would think that it is, verbs and nouns and adjectives and adverbs. But if you look at Sinhala, I think it is common for any language, there are certain words you are not sure the category of this word, right? And it's very difficult to find any, authentic documentation about these facts. And similarly, there are a lot of, disagreement with respect to, special, specific cases with respect to grammar and all. So developing computing systems to do these language processing task is very, very challenging, and we are slowly working on that. And in another front, we are mainly looking at collecting data and cleaning and annotating data. So if you take language computing, so we call natural language processing. If you look at the modern techniques, or we call machine learning or deep learning techniques, most are dependent on this data. We have to train systems with data. So if you don't have data, we can't make use of these cutting edge technology. So we are putting a lot of effort to generate data and then publicly release them so that anyone could use. So, and it will open, the paths for many collaborations as well. So we have already released annotated data for sentiment analysis and for part of speech tagging, and a small focus for machine translation. So likewise, and then we are currently working on annotating named entity recognition and for reference resolution. So in the future, these data sets will also be publicly released. And another important thing is this linguistic, language resources, or not only the data, but this textual data, but for example, sentiment lexicons, right? So that means what are the words that people use in Sinhala to express their sentiment, opinion, right? Like on the Naraka, different words, and then bilingual dictionaries, right? So for a given Sinhala word, what is the English word? And the list of named entities. So what are the list of named entities, like a list of person names, list of city names, and list of location names, all in Sinhala, right? So these are language resources that we are collecting, and some of them have already been released. And we are also trying to do cutting edge research by making use of the latest technology that is available there. If you look at the field of natural language processing, it is fastly evolving with the blessings of these tech giants like Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. They are all into this business. So a lot of new technologies are coming up. So we are constantly, trying to follow the latest developments in the field, and then we are trying to incorporate them in our systems. And then there are a lot of company models that are being developed and publicly released by these tech giants, and we are trying to make use of them in our system. So a very good example is this multilingual language models released by Facebook and Google, and we have seen that these models are giving very good results, very impressive results for tasks such as machine translation. And on top of that, we are trying to establish collaborations locally as well as internationally. So as you also mentioned, the collaborations between UCSC and University of Moratuwa, the produce a lot of valuable resources and projects. And so currently also we are having very close contacts, and we are trying to work together. And also especially from we are trying to establish contacts and work with researchers in India, because they are also facing similar difficulties like us, because the languages are not mainstream like English. So those collaborations are also showing very fruitful results. And yeah, so those are the current developments in
Thank you.
Center.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Chamila Liyanage. So I'm going to actually next panelist, Ms. Chamila Liyanage. And so what we, as a researcher attached to Local Language Technology Research Lab of UCSC, can you elaborate on the development with regard to OCR, text-to-speech? And also if you can actually touch upon the corpus that I think came from the Localization project, which is one of the largest in Sri Lanka. So over to you, Chamila.
Thank you. Good evening. So I first talk about OCR and text-to-speech projects. So there are 3 projects actually: Sinhala OCR, Sinhala TTS, and Tamil TTS. So these 3 are actually we are working on these 3 projects for maybe around 3 to 5 years. So for now, they are in a good state that we are now ready to release as well. So if we first look at single OCR system, so it actually I should say that we were able to achieve the accuracy at similar, or sometimes it is better than Google's OCR. So now many of so many people are using Google OCR system. So we were able to reach into that particular level as well. So that OCR is now almost ready to release. And I should mention that so we worked on so Sinhala is a very complex script, as I think many of you know, that we were able to cover all the conjoined letters, and we in Sinhala we say Bandiyakuru. So all these letters are covered in our OCR system, but not touching letters. Touching letters are a little bit difficult, and it is not used. Touching letters are not used in contemporary writing. So they are used in the ancient writing, but not in the in contemporary writing. So therefore, we did not process these touching letters, but most of the other stuff can be processed and get a good result of our OCR system. So if you move into TTS systems, so we first started TTS systems under Pan-Localization project in 2007. We released first Sinhala TTS system that was robotic voice, but later we realized that robotic voice is not much useful, because the visually impaired community in Sri Lanka, they asked for a human voice TTS, because for us it is something a voice, but for them it is something that they have to listen all the time whenever they use computers. So they asked for a human voice TTS system. So we started human voice TTS system as well. So now it is in a good state that we have developed, and within the next few months we are ready to release that as well. And on the other hand, Tamil TTS, so that is we have done for Sri Lanka Tamil, not for Indian Tamil. So for that we get some assistance from a Tamil professor as well, because we at our laboratory had no linguistic person to understand phonological rules of Sri Lanka Tamil, so that we get some assistance, and we were able to identify the rules, phonological rules, and were able to produce to develop Tamil TTS as well. So all these three projects are now in a good state that we can release them. So
Yeah, Chamila. So I think we are running out of time. So I think, can you also touch a little bit about the corpus also, and then we'll finish it?
Yeah.
Can we give it in like few seconds? I think you have to do it.
Yeah, okay, sir. That corpus is, I think, it is not much bigger. It only has 10 million words, but now Common Crawler corpus has more. I mean, it is very big. But the very importance of our corpus is, it is, I mean, errors are very low. So that is why we were able to produce some, I mean, to develop some good tools with using that particular corpus.
Okay, thank you, Chamila. So we are now running out of time. But you know, this work, I think some of the things that what happened for the last 20 years, really will had actually contributed for ordinary users of internet and the computers in Sri Lanka, I think. So so today also we talked about like I had a discussion with the Secretary Technology Ministry, and he was talking about to have a good translators, and the OCR is going to be very important for our work with the code computerization, and text-to-speech is also going to be very important. So all this work is very important, and especially international domain names. And I think, and the universal acceptance, all of that will, I think I feel that will one of the greatest achievement in the computing in Sri Lanka. So thank you very much for all the panelists. So we'll finish it, and I think we don't have the time to. There are some questions, but still I think they have to ask it offline. Thank you very much for all.